Broadcasting from Tokyo, Japan, a slow media project. Bold, reality grounded, unexpected perspectives, global affairs with context, culture with bite. No clickbait.
It's a dinner party.
For your brain, the Fushigi Times Podcast with Angelino Schintu.
Hello and welcome. It's the Fushigi Times Podcast, the audio edition of my long-form journalism at fushigitimes.com. In this episode...
Here, outside the rather flamboyantly titled Hoity-Toity Heidi-Hi Court of Irreproachable Decorum in London, the Kirralie Smith case appealing the judgment handed down by an Australian court.
The court is now in session for the appeal of Ms. Kirralie Smith against the decision by the Deputy Chief Magistrate of the local court in Sydney, Australia.
In these Fushigi times, what are we to do when justice trades its scales for movable goalposts and absurdity becomes the law? This episode of the Fushigi Times Podcast is brought to you by, and I could be mentioning your organization's name here. Keep listening to find out how our promotional partnership packages work. Meanwhile, in Australia, monkeys run the zoo and blokes in frocks rule the courts.
Here, outside the rather flamboyantly titled Hoity-Toity Heidi-Hi Court of Irreproachable Decorum in London, the Kirralie Smith case appealing the judgment handed down by an Australian court that found her guilty of unlawful vilification, otherwise known as hate speech, is about to begin. The point of contention, her social media description of a transgender athlete as a bloke in a frock. Yes, you heard it correctly. For the uninitiated, that's local slang for a fella in a skirt, a dude in a ball gown, a man in a dress. The case has somehow found its way here to London's most grandiloquent court, a place where wigs are taller than toddlers and titles are longer than legal judgments. A fitting stage for an appeal that began in the comparatively modest confines of Sydney's local court. What makes today particularly noteworthy is the person representing Ms. Smith. No, it's not the Lincoln lawyer, nor Boston's silver-tongued primetime television legal virtuoso, Alan Shaw. It is the Fushigi Times editor-in-chief, Angelino Schintu, whose decades in journalism, broadcasting and occasional stage and screen turns in barristers' and priests' frocks have endowed him with the eloquence and courtroom flair to argue the merits of this case. It's one that has captured attention far beyond the usual legal circles because it isn't just about a single phrase or social media post. It touches on freedom of speech, satire, and frankly, common sense. Kirralie Smith's supporters argue she was merely stating an obvious biological reality in typically Australian colloquial style. Her critics say the language was offensive. Either way, the Commonwealth, and now this court, is about to weigh in.
All rise. The Most Honourable Montague St John Fairfax Blythe, the 3rd Earl of Tittingford-on-Thames, Viscount Westbridge, Baron Alderley, Keeper of the King's Benchlands, Lord High Steward of the Thames Marshes, Grand Arbiter of the silken robes and ceremonial sashes, Defender of historic frock protocols, and Supreme Chancellor of the Hoity-Toity Heidi-Hi Court of Irreproachable Decorum presiding. The court is now in session for the appeal of Ms. Kirralie Smith against the decision by the Deputy Chief Magistrate of the local court in Sydney, Australia, who found Ms. Smith guilty of unlawful vilification in relation to her description of a transgender athlete as a bloke in a frock.
Your Honour, Your Eminent Lordship, esteemed members of the court and all assembled, I rise today to address a ruling that defies not just logic, but history, reason, and, frankly, the collective memory of Western civilization's wardrobe choices. My client, Ms. Kirralie Smith, a woman of sharp wit, impeccable timing, and enviable sartorial taste, has been found guilty of unlawful vilification for referring to two male-born athletes as men. In case you missed it, this decision was rendered by the Deputy Chief Magistrate Sharon Freund of the New South Wales Local Court in Sydney, Australia. Now, one might assume, in a properly functioning world, that the observation that two biological males are men would be wholly uncontroversial. Yet here we are, Your Worship, forced to waste the court's indulgence, wrestling not with a matter of law, but with absurdity.
Exhibit A, Antiquity and Where It All Began.
My lord, if you'll indulge me for the briefest of moments, let us commence with a little history. Consider ancient Rome. Everyone's in a frock. Julius Caesar, Augustus, even the skirt-wearing gladiators, when they weren't shirtless because apparently chest hair and biceps alone were insufficient for the Senate's approval. The toga, a giant bedsheet you wore as though you'd lost a bet in a particularly cruel hazing incident or frat house challenge, and somehow this improvised garment became the uniform of world domination. One wonders if the fearsome Gauls, Asterix and Obelix, paused mid-charge to look downward toward their loins and critique their pleats. And ancient Greece, equally fabulous, finish a naked, sweaty wrestling match, towel yourself off, slip into a chiton, which is essentially a summer dress, and then head out to invent democracy. Imagine Socrates philosophizing in flowing linen while debating whether sandals or bare feet best convey moral superiority. What about in biblical times? I'll pause to satirize my own faith for a moment. My Lord can be certain that Moses did not part the Red Sea in cargo shorts. No, he was in a frock. And what about Jesus? Sandals, robe, beard. Basically a 1st century hipster in a linen maxi dress. The wedding at Cana. Water miraculously turned into wine. Less a banquet of manliness and more H&M summer collection launch meets miracle catering. Shakespeare's plays. Women were forbidden on stage, so all female roles were portrayed by, men in dresses. Imagine the passion of Romeo with his Juliet, or Ophelia performed by, yes, my lord, Blokes and Frocks, delivering tragic lines to an audience of Elizabethan gentlemen who themselves were likely sporting ruffles so stiff they could double as neck armor. And let's not forget Japan's kabuki theater, where even today the onagata, male actors specializing in female roles, perform in elaborate kimonos and makeup. From London's Globe to Tokyo's Kabukiza, theatrical frocks and gender-bending performance have a long, illustrious lineage. And what about the Celts? Those were frocks. Vikings, tunics to the knees. Samurai, hakama trousers so wide they might as well have been pleated skirts. Blokes in frocks everywhere you look.
Hi, we hope you're enjoying the podcast. If your organisation shares our values, slow media, long-form journalism, global context, we'd love to work with you. This is where your branding could be, right here in the middle of the Fushigi Times podcast, just like in the written edition, heard and seen by a global audience that values independent thinking and cultural depth. Be part of the Fushigi. Email editor@fushigitimes.com and let's start a conversation.
No clickbait. Culture with bite. The Fushigi Times Podcast.
Exhibit B, the warriors of the world. Now, your lordship, consider the world's warriors. Indeed, you yourself come from a long line of skirted warriors, do you not? Scottish Highlanders storming into battle wearing kilts. That's a skirt. Braveheart, less about the war and more about the freedom to accessorize with tartan. Then there are the Romans again. Their soldiers wore short tunics, suspiciously like miniskirts. They conquered half the known world while flashing a bit of bum cheek. Pardon me, my lord, whilst displaying a flash of errant thigh. Then there are the Knights Templar, long white robes with giant red crosses, basically medieval knighties, and they terrified people. Imagine being conquered by a crusader in what looks like a hospital-gowned cosplay. The Maasai of East Africa wear the shuka, a wrap of vibrant red cloth. Elegant, powerful, frocked up, your worship. And what about the Japanese samurai with their hakama? Nothing says, "Ima kara kubio kirzo," I'm about to decapitate you, while looking like you've just walked off a Paris fashion show runway. Exhibit C, Religions of the World, Frock Central. Religion may be the world's largest frock convention. Catholic priests in cassocks, bishops in mitres, or holy dunce caps as I've heard them described, and embroidered robes. The Pope? Undisputed heavyweight champion of frockery. Hats taller than toddlers, gold trim glinting under Vatican lights. The Archbishop of Canterbury, regional manager of frocks there, definitely auditioning for Britain's next top holy traffic cone in a frock. Orthodox priests, floor-length black gowns, swishing about in the midst of all the bells and smells, with more drama than a Shakespearean cast performing the forbidden-to-be-named aloud Scottish play. Buddhist monks, Hindu sadhus, druids, draped, robed, saffroned or moonlit in white. Combine them all in one room and you'd swear you'd stumbled into Italy's Pitti Uomo, the eternal collection. Exhibit D, kings, queens and aristocrats, frock royalty by any other name. 17th and 18th century French aristocrats, drag queens with power. Louis XIV, the Sun King, looking like RuPaul's personal stylist went rogue. Wigs, powder, lace, high heels. Pardon me, my lord. British judges, your lordship, are still wearing wigs and gowns. The law, still comparable to Monty Python in serious voices. And what about graduation ceremonies? Hogwarts cosplay for everyone. Coronation robes, velvet, ermine, crowns, but the frocks steal the show every time. Exhibit E, the accidental frocks of modern life. Hospital gowns, bathrobes, the snuggie, all examples of modern accidental frocks. Boxers, wrestlers, MMA fighters entering the ring in the blue corner. In sequined robes, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Mike Tyson, all frocked up, intimidating, yet undeniably fabulous. Nothing says, fear me, like arriving for a fight in silk and sequins. Exhibit F, the world of entertainment and comedy. Your Eminence, let us consider the British pantomime. The dame is usually a bloke in an over-the-top frock, bellowing jokes and egging the audience on to ever more excited, "Oh, yes, he is," to his, "Oh, no, he's not," banter. Monty Python. Half the sketches are men in dresses shrieking things like, "No, he's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy." The Rocky Horror Picture Show. Tim Curry as Dr. Frankenfurter is the Shakespeare of fishnets, and Hollywood loves it. Robin Williams is the amazing Mrs. Doubtfire. Dustin Hoffman in Tootsie. Not to forget Jack Lemmon, Tyler Perry, Eddie Murphy, all performing genders like a theatrical Olympics, each frock a gold medal in comedic mastery. And of course we must mention Australia's own Dame Edna Everage. From average suburban Melbourne housewife to the glitz and glamour of Royal Command performances at London's Royal Albert Hall. Barry Humphries, adorned in purple hair, rhinestones and razor-sharp wit, proved that a bloke in a frock could dominate comedy stages, television and the hearts of millions for decades. Music. David Bowie, Kurt Cobain, Prince, Harry Styles. If you haven't worn a frock at least once, are you even a rock star? Exhibit G. Fashion and the normalization of the frock. At Paris Fashion Week and at Florence's Pitti Uomo, men in skirts. Jean-Paul Gaultier, Marc Jacobs, Tom Brown, frocking constantly. Conor McGregor wore a kilt, bagpipes in hand, teeth intact, and still KO'd the opposition. Half of the Pacific and Southeast Asia wear sarongs daily, and civilization hasn't collapsed yet. Fabric is tied, untied, admired, and life moves on. Exhibit H, the everyday bloke in a frock. A point, Your Worship, is that frocks are everywhere. Every culture, class, and continent, from Moses to McGregor, Aristotle to Eddie Izzard, Braveheart to bathrobe. And the scandal? Pretending this is new, shocking, or dangerous. My lord, it's not. History's laughing at us from behind its flowing robes and frocks.
Hi, we hope you're enjoying the podcast. If your organisation shares our values, slow media, long-form journalism, global context, we'd love to work with you. This is where your branding could be, right here in the middle of the Fushigi Times podcast. Just like in the written edition, heard and seen by a global audience that values independent thinking and cultural depth. Be part of the Fushigi. Email editor@fushigitimes.com and let's start a conversation.
Unexpected Perspectives, a slow media project. The Fushigi Times Podcast.
The closing argument, from satire to reality. Your Eminent Hoity-Toity Lordship, for all this glorious history of frocks, one might think society would simply shrug and go on with its day-to-day. A bloke in a frock has been, and continues to be, an historical constant, theatrical flourish, sartorial choice, but recently, in New South Wales, Australia, a nation whose constitution is still so young the ink has barely dried, the courts would have us believe that centuries of culture do not inoculate a phrase from scrutiny. Kirralie Smith, for noting biological males are men, was found guilty of unlawful vilification. hate speech by Deputy Chief Magistrate Sharon Freund. Simple observations, once humorous turns of phrase, are now, apparently, matters for legal judgment. We'll leave the Victorian Premier Dictator Dan's handling of the COVID-19 lockdown regime for another day, but hasn't there been enough authoritarian overreach into the lives of the Australian citizenry? Time for a reality check. The absurdity in context. My lord, history, humour and the law have dramatically collided in what can only be described as a baffling, nonsensical wokery in the judgment handed down against my client. The same world-tolerating emperors in togas, Scottish warriors in kilts, Monty Python in dresses and fake bosoms, even the emperor's new clothes, now gets to weigh in on a social media post. Context matters. Culture collides with the law in ways that are quite literally surreal. And what about freedom of speech? Beneath frocks, jokes and theatricality, the New South Wales court case cuts deeper. This was not a debate about men and women's sports, but that's what it should have been about. A case about a man born with the usual male tackle between his legs who insists on prancing about in a frock and playing where he doesn't belong. To clarify for those still somewhat confused individuals, this court case and its incredible judgment was an absolute travesty, a full frontal attack on freedom of speech. The defendant, Kirralie Smith, took a very Aussie, colloquial shot, simply observing a biological reality, stating a most obvious and clear truth. These are blokes in frocks. And that's fine, they're allowed to be. But there's no place for them on women's sports fields. She was viciously penalised for stating her valid opinion. The monkeys have taken over the zoo, your lordship. Overturn this insane, egregious ruling. The legal system, under the guise of civility, stifles public discourse. In her ruling, the Deputy Chief Magistrate displayed what can only be described as hateful behaviour towards the defendant, policing words rather than addressing where genuine harm is being done. This ruling upholds a woke, namby-pamby stance that satire, commentary, even blunt opinion can be legally censured if it offends one of the more fragile humans' perceived sensibilities. Australia embarrassingly lags behind the global movement away from diversity, equity and inclusion, that's DEI, overreach. It shows how easily speech is being curtailed, leaving truth and debate at risk. After centuries of men in dresses, blokes in frocks, your lordship, kilts, togas, cassocks and snuggies, history's lessons in levity still clash violently with nonsensical liberal legal wokery. Freedom of speech, which is the lifeblood of satire, dissent and cultural dialogue, is endangered by those meant to protect it. The most absurd reality is not about calling someone a bloke in a frock, but that speaking plainly, even irreverently, in public debate is treated as a crime. The truth, the facts, are not movable goalposts and deserve to linger long after the laughter fades. Mr. Bean, Blackadder, Rowan Atkinson on free speech. In the words of comic royalty Rowan Atkinson, the strongest weapon against hateful speech is not repression, it is more speech. Atkinson's advocacy underscores the importance of robust dialogue and the right to offend as essential components of a free society. It highlights with elegant clarity the absurdity of the New South Wales court's decision. Attempting to police speech under the guise of civility risks silencing truth, satire, and the very commentary that keeps society honest, journalism itself. In the end, history shows us that men in dresses are nothing new. What is new, and deeply troubling, is a society that punishes speech for merely describing that historical, cultural, and theatrical fact. Satire, commentary, and even blunt opinion are vital to a healthy democracy. No bloke in a frock, no court ruling, and no DEI department should be allowed to take that away. And so, my lord, as we rise from the theatre of absurdity that has been this courtroom, let us remember, defending the right to speak plainly, to laugh, to comment even irreverently, or to state a global majority position for a cause, that there's no place in women's sports for biological men, in this case, blokes in frocks on a women's soccer field, is not just a defence of freedom. It is, in fact, a defence of civilisation itself. One bloke in a frock at a time.
All rise, court adjourned.
This original content is part of our slow media canon, carefully crafted, independently produced, and free forever. But slow media needs slow money. If this content resonated, support the Fushigi Times by subscribing, free or paid, but paid helps produce more of this essential journalism, and every bit helps keep the editor, that's me, copiously caffeinated and busy crafting more Fushigi.
The Fushigi Times Podcast, an original slow media production. From the studios of Fushigi Labs, Tokyo.
Created by Angelino Schintu.
Want to rebroadcast this content? Broadcast. Or talk collaboration? Email editor@fushigitimes.com.